They laughed when Maya Torres accepted the crumbling recording studio in her grandmother's will. A single mother drowning in debt, inheriting a building everyone said was worthless, just another burden she couldn't afford. But beneath layers of concrete and forgotten dreams, something waited in the darkness, something that would silence every doubter and rewrite her family's future forever. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Have you ever been so desperate that even the worst option felt like hope? Maya Torres knew that feeling better than most. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. At 32, she carried the weight of the world on shoulders that had grown tired of bearing it alone. Her daughter Sofia, just 7 years old, deserved a childhood free from the anxiety that kept Maya awake each night, staring at bills she couldn't pay, eviction notices she couldn't ignore, and a future that felt like it was closing in from all sides. The Los Angeles neighborhood where they lived had long ago lost its shine. What had once been a vibrant community now felt like a place people passed through on their way to somewhere better. Maya worked 2 jobs: mornings at a medical billing office, where fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song, and evenings cleaning office buildings after everyone else had gone home. Between shifts, she was a mother, a homework helper, a chef cooking meals from whatever remained in the pantry, and a woman trying desperately not to let her daughter see the fear in her eyes. Money wasn't just tight, it was suffocating. The rent was 3 months overdue. The landlord's patience had worn through like cheap fabric. Sofia's shoes were too small, her winter coat held together by safety pins and hope. Every morning, Maya performed the same calculation in her head: gas money versus groceries, utilities versus medicine, dignity versus survival. There was never enough to cover everything. There was barely enough to cover anything. Her car, a 1998 Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles, made sounds that mechanics described with words like terminal and not worth fixing. But she couldn't afford to replace it, couldn't even afford the repairs, so she drove it anyway, whispering prayers each time the engine coughed and sputtered. She had learned to ignore the grinding noise from the transmission, the way the brake pedal went soft when she pressed it, the check engine light that had been glowing amber for so long it felt like a permanent feature. The call about her grandmother's passing came on a Tuesday, during the brief window between jobs, when Maya allowed herself to sit down with a cup of instant coffee and pretend, just for 15 minutes, that life was manageable. Abuela Carmen had been distant for years, living alone in a part of the city Maya rarely visited. They had exchanged cards at Christmas, brief phone calls on birthdays, but the warmth that once connected them had cooled with time and circumstance. Maya attended the funeral alone, leaving Sofia with a neighbor who charged $10 an hour for childcare Maya couldn't afford. The service was small, attended by people whose faces she didn't recognize and couldn't remember. Afterward, the attorney handling the estate, a tired-looking man with reading glasses perched on his nose, handed her an envelope and explained that her grandmother had left her something in the will. For a fleeting moment, Maya felt hope kindle in her chest. Maybe money, maybe enough to catch up on rent, to fix the car, to give Sofia a birthday party, instead of another quiet evening, pretending they could afford to celebrate. But when the attorney spoke again, that hope extinguished as quickly as it had sparked. "She left you a property," he said, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "A commercial building in East Los Angeles. It's been vacant for quite some time." Maya's stomach sank. A building. Not cash, not savings, not a solution to the immediate crisis threatening to bury her. A building that would come with property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance, all the things she couldn't afford even if the structure had been made of gold. "What kind of building?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. The attorney hesitated, the kind of pause that carries bad news. It's a recording studio. Well, it was. Your grandmother's late husband owned it back in the 90s. It's been abandoned for nearly 20 years. The words landed like stones. A recording studio. Abandoned. Worthless. The attorney slid a photograph across the desk, and Maya stared at the image with growing dread. The building looked like something awaiting demolition: graffiti-covered walls, boarded windows, a sagging roofline, chain-link fencing tangled with dead weeds. The neighborhood around it appeared equally desolate, the kind of area people avoided after dark. I have to be honest with you, the attorney continued, his voice carrying the practiced gentleness of someone delivering bad news often. The property has significant code violations. The city has threatened to condemn it multiple times. There's back taxes owed, structural damage, and it's in a redevelopment zone, which means the land value is essentially zero unless someone invests heavily in rehabilitation. Maya closed her eyes and felt the familiar pressure building behind them, the tightness that came before tears she refused to shed in front of strangers. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a burden, another weight added to the crushing load she already carried. "Can I refuse it?" she asked quietly. The attorney nodded. "You can disclaim the inheritance. It would revert to the estate, which would likely lead to a public auction. Given the condition and location, it probably wouldn't sell. The city would eventually demolish it." She should have refused. Logic screamed at her to walk away, to let someone else deal with the crumbling mess her grandmother had left behind. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the photograph, the way sunlight still touched the building's facade despite the decay. Maybe it was the memory of Abuela Carmen telling stories about the music that once filled those walls, the dreams recorded in those forgotten rooms. Or maybe it was simply that Maya had nothing else to lose. "I'll take it," she heard herself say. The attorney looked surprised but didn't argue. Papers were signed, keys were exchanged, and just like that, Maya became the owner of a property that everyone, including herself, knew was worthless. The first time she told someone about the inheritance, their reaction set the pattern for everything that followed. It was her sister, Elena, always practical, always quick to point out Maya's mistakes. They sat in Elena's pristine kitchen, drinking coffee from matching ceramic mugs, surrounded by the comfortable prosperity Maya had never achieved. "You accepted it?" Elena's voice rose with disbelief. "Maya, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking," Maya admitted quietly. I couldn't let it go. It's a condemned building in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. Do you have any idea what the property taxes alone will cost? The liability insurance? What if someone gets hurt there? You could be sued for everything you don't even have. Each word was a hammer blow, driving home the reality Maya had tried to ignore. Elena continued, her voice edged with frustration, born from watching her younger sister make what she saw as yet another terrible decision. "You should disclaim it immediately. Call the attorney. Tell him you made a mistake. You can't afford this, Maya. You can barely afford rent. This building is going to drag you under even faster." But Maya had already signed the papers. The building was hers, for better or worse. When word spread through family and friends, the responses ranged from pity to mockery, but never support. Her cousin Miguel laughed openly when she mentioned it at a family gathering. "You inherited what? A crack house? That's perfect, Maya. Absolutely perfect. What are you going to do, turn it into a homeless shelter? That's about all it's good for." Her landlord, when she mentioned she needed more time to pay rent because of unexpected inheritance complications, assumed she was lying. "If you inherited something valuable, you'd sell it and pay what you owe. Don't insult my intelligence with stories about worthless buildings." Even the women she worked with at the medical billing office exchanged knowing glances when Maya tried to explain why she needed a day off to visit the property. One of them, Karen, didn't bother hiding her skepticism. "Honey, if you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. If it was worth anything, your grandmother would have sold it herself. Buildings don't sit empty for 20 years unless they're basically unsellable. You got stuck with a demolition project, not an inheritance. The worst was Sofia's father, Raphael, who had left when their daughter was 2 and contributed nothing but criticism from a distance. When he heard about the building, Maya never learned how, he called just to mock her. This is exactly why you're broke, Maya. You make stupid decisions. Who accepts a condemned building? Sell it for scrap. Cut your losses, and try not to mess up Sofia's life any more than you already have. Every comment cut deeper than the last, not because they were cruel, though some were, but because Maya feared they were right. She lay awake those first nights, after accepting the inheritance, staring at the ceiling of her cramped apartment, listening to Sofia's soft breathing from the bed they shared, and wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. But she couldn't undo it now. The building was hers, and somehow, despite everything, she needed to see it with her own eyes. The drive to the property took 40 minutes through traffic that seemed designed to test her patience and her car's failing transmission. The neighborhood appeared even worse in person than in the photograph. Liquor stores with barred windows, boarded-up storefronts, groups of men lingering on corners, watching her car pass with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Maya locked the doors and kept driving, following the address the attorney had given her. When she finally pulled up in front of the building, her heart sank so completely she had to sit in the car for several minutes before finding the courage to get out. The photograph hadn't captured the full extent of the decay. Graffiti covered every surface in layers upon layers of spray paint, tags and murals, and words she didn't want to read. The front entrance was boarded over with plywood that had itself been painted, vandalized, and weathered until it looked like abstract art created by neglect. The roof sagged in the middle, clearly damaged by years of rain leaking through holes she couldn't yet see. Windows on the second floor were either broken or missing entirely. Dark openings that stared out like empty eye sockets. The chain-link fence surrounding the small parking lot had been cut in multiple places, the metal peeled back like wounds that had never healed. This was what she had inherited, this monument to abandonment and decay. Maya stepped out of the car slowly, hyper-aware of being watched. A woman across the street sat on her porch, staring without expression. A car passed by, slowing down as the driver looked her over. She moved quickly to the front entrance, fumbling with the keys the attorney had given her. The padlock on the plywood door was rusty but still functional. It took 3 tries before the key turned, and when she finally pulled the plywood back, the smell that emerged made her step backward involuntarily. Mold, decay, standing, water, the accumulated stench of 2 decades of neglect. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, knowing the electricity had been shut off years ago. The beam cut through darkness, thick with dust, and revealed a lobby that must have once been impressive. High ceilings, what looked like marble floors beneath the dirt and debris, a reception desk that had been stripped of everything valuable, leaving only the wooden frame. Maya moved deeper inside, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. To her left, a hallway led to what appeared to be offices. To her right, a door hung open, revealing stairs descending into deeper darkness. Straight ahead, double doors stood partially ajar, and she could see the edge of what must have been the main recording space. She pushed through the double doors and stopped, overwhelmed by the scale of what she was seeing. The studio was massive, easily 40 feet across, with ceilings that rose at least 20 feet high. Soundproofing foam still clung to the walls in patches, though much of it had deteriorated or been torn down. The control room was visible through a large window, its glass somehow still intact, despite everything else being destroyed. Equipment was gone, stripped out long ago, leaving only the scars where things had been mounted or installed. Cables hung from the ceiling like dead vines. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, empty bottles, the remnants of whoever had been using this space as shelter, or worse. But beneath the destruction, Maya could sense something. The bones of the building were still solid. The walls were thick, the ceilings high. The space itself possessed a quality she couldn't quite name. Potential, maybe, or memory. The ghost of what it had once been. She spent an hour exploring, documenting damage with her phone camera, trying to calculate the impossible mathematics of restoration. Every room told the same story: decay, vandalism, abandonment. The second floor was worse, with actual holes in the roof letting sunlight stream through in dusty columns. Birds had nested in the corners. Raccoons had clearly made homes in the walls. It was in the basement that she found the first hint that this building still held secrets. The stairs down were treacherous, several steps cracked or missing entirely. She descended carefully, one hand on the wall for balance, the phone's flashlight barely adequate for the darkness. The basement was cooler, damper, the smell of mold stronger here. Water had definitely been a problem. The floor was still wet in places, and she could hear the slow drip, drip, drip of moisture somewhere in the darkness. The space was divided into several rooms. A storage area filled with empty shelves, what looked like a small workshop. A utility room where the building's ancient heating system sat like a forgotten monument. And at the far end, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of drywall, a door she almost didn't see. It was metal, painted the same industrial gray as the walls, but heavier than a normal door. She approached it slowly, brushing away cobwebs and dust. There was no handle, just a small circular panel that looked like it might have once been electronic, but was now dead, unpowered by decades, without electricity. Maya tried to push the door. It didn't budge. She tried pulling. Nothing. It was locked or sealed somehow, impervious to her efforts. She examined the frame more closely and realized this wasn't just a door, it was a security door, the kind designed to protect something valuable. What would a recording studio need to secure with a vault-style door? The question stayed with her as she finished exploring the basement, but she found nothing else unusual, just decay and damage, and the overwhelming evidence that this building was exactly what everyone had told her it was: worthless. She drove home in silence, too exhausted to even turn on the radio. Sofia was waiting at the neighbor's apartment, and Maya's heart clenched at the smile on her daughter's face, the innocent hope that maybe, just maybe, the inheritance meant their lives would get easier. "Did you see it, Mama?" Sofia asked, practically bouncing with excitement. "Is it beautiful? Are we going to move there?" Maya knelt down, pulling her daughter into a hug to hide the tears threatening to spill. "It needs a lot of work, baby. A lot of work." That night, after Sofia had fallen asleep, Maya sat at the tiny kitchen table with her laptop open, searching for information about the building. Her grandmother's late husband had owned it, but she knew almost nothing about him. He had died before Maya was born, a shadowy figure referenced only occasionally in family stories. What she found shocked her. The building hadn't just been a recording studio. According to archived news articles from the mid-1992s, it had been one of the premier studios in Los Angeles. Major artists had recorded there. Grammy-winning albums had been produced within those walls. And most significantly, for a brief period in 1996, the studio had been leased to Death Row Records. Tupac Shakur had recorded there. The articles were clear. During the final months before his death, Tupac had used the studio for several sessions, working on what would become posthumously released material. The studio had been his refuge, a place away from the chaos of his public life. Maya stared at the screen, her mind racing. If Tupac had worked there, if the studio had been that important, Why had it been abandoned? Why had her grandmother's husband let it fall into such complete disrepair? She searched deeper, finding mentions of financial troubles, legal disputes, the collapse of death row records itself. The studio had been caught in the chaos, left empty when the money dried up and the lawsuits began. Eventually, it had simply been forgotten. Another casualty of an era that had burned too bright and too fast. But that metal door in the basement, that security door, what had it been protecting? The question haunted her through a sleepless night. By morning, Maya had made a decision that everyone would call foolish. She was going to find out what was behind that door. The next week unfolded like a slow-motion catastrophe. Maya couldn't afford to hire professionals, couldn't afford the proper permits or equipment, couldn't afford anything except her own stubborn determination. She borrowed tools from a neighbor who worked construction. She watched YouTube videos on how to breach security doors. She called locksmiths until she found one desperate enough for work that he'd take payments. The first locksmith she brought to the building took one look at the basement door and laughed. "Lady, this isn't a lock. This is a security system. Even without power, these things have mechanical backups. You'd need specialized equipment. And even then," he trailed off, shaking his head, "not worth my time. Sorry." The second locksmith was more encouraging but equally unhelpful. "I could get through it, but it would take days and cost you at least $3,000. You sure there's something worth that much behind it?" She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything, except that giving up now meant accepting that everyone who had mocked her was right. It was Sofia who inadvertently gave her the answer. One evening, helping with homework, Maya explained basic electrical circuits to her daughter. Sofia, drawing a picture of a battery and wires, asked innocently, "If the door needs electricity to open, why don't you just give it electricity?" The solution was so simple Maya almost laughed. The door's electronic lock had failed because the building had no power. But if she could provide temporary power directly to the lock mechanism, bypass the building's dead electrical system entirely, she might be able to trigger it to open. She spent her meager savings on a portable generator, heavy-duty extension cords, and every electrical supply the hardware store clerk recommended when she explained what she was trying to do. The clerk, a young man covered in tattoos, looked skeptical but intrigued. "You're trying to break into your own building." "Technically, I'm trying to break into my own basement." He grinned. "That's either really smart or really stupid. Good luck either way." The work took days. Maya could only visit the building in the evenings after both jobs, working by the light of battery-powered lanterns. The generator was loud enough that she worried about attracting attention, but the neighborhood seemed to operate on a code of deliberate ignorance. Nobody bothered her, and she bothered nobody. She traced the wiring from the door's lock mechanism, identifying which circuits needed power. She rigged a connection from the generator, bypassing decades of dead switches and corroded wiring. Twice, she nearly electrocuted herself. Once, a circuit sparked so violently she jumped back and knocked over a lantern, plunging the basement into darkness while her heart hammered against her ribs. But on the 8th night, something changed. She connected the final wire, double-checked her work, and flipped the switch on the generator. The machine roared to life, and for the first time in 20 years, electricity flowed to the security door. Nothing happened immediately. She waited, barely breathing, watching the small panel beside the door. Then, so faintly she almost missed it, a red LED light flickered. Then another. The panel was coming alive. She waited longer, watching the light stabilize. Then, with a mechanical sound that made her jump, a heavy, grinding clunk, the door's locking mechanism released. Maya grabbed the edge of the door and pulled. It was heavy, resistant, but it moved. Inch by inch, she dragged it open, metal scraping against metal, the sound echoing through the empty basement. Cool air rushed out. carrying a smell that was different from the rest of the building. Not mold or decay, something else. Something almost preserved. She grabbed her lantern and shined it through the opening. The beam revealed a room small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with concrete walls and a ceiling so low she'd have to duck to enter. The floor was dry. The air, while stale, didn't carry the moisture that plagued the rest of the basement. And along the walls, stacked carefully on metal shelving units that had somehow survived intact, were boxes, dozens of them, maybe more than 100. They weren't random storage boxes. They were archival boxes, the kind used for important documents. Each one was labeled with numbers and dates. Maya stepped inside, her hands trembling as she set the lantern down. She pulled the nearest box toward her and opened it carefully. Inside, protected by plastic sleeves, were recording session logs, master tapes, session notes written in different hands, production schedules. And on many of them, one name appeared again and again: Tupac Shakur. Her breath caught. She opened another box. More tapes, more documentation, lyric sheets in handwriting she recognized from the articles she'd read, reference materials, personal notes. This wasn't just a storage room. It was an archive, a time capsule from the final months of Tupac's life. She moved deeper into the room, opening boxes with increasing urgency. Each one revealed more treasures: unreleased recordings, alternative takes of famous songs, collaborations that had never seen the light of day, videotapes marked with dates from 1996, photographs she had never seen published, showing Tupac in the studio, working, laughing, completely absorbed in the music, personal items that had clearly been stored here for safekeeping and then forgotten when the studio closed. There were boxes containing complete master tapes of recording sessions, each one carefully labeled with date, time, and participating artists. Others held written materials, lyric sheets showing Tupac's creative process, notes scrawled in margins, entire verses crossed out and rewritten. She found production notes that revealed his meticulous attention to sound quality, his insistence on perfection, his willingness to record the same verse dozens of times until it captured exactly what he wanted to express. But it was the box at the back of the room, sealed with additional tape and marked private, estate documents, that changed everything. Inside were legal papers, contracts, but also something else. A letter, addressed to her grandmother's late husband, from Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur. Maya read it by lantern light, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the page. The letter thanked him for protecting Tupac's work. It discussed the chaos following Tupac's death, the legal battles over his estate, the attempts by various parties to claim ownership of unreleased material, the vultures who had circled immediately after his death looking to profit from his legacy. And it explained that certain items, the most valuable, the most personal, had been entrusted to the studio for safekeeping until the legal situation stabilized. The letter was dated November 1996, just 2 months after Tupac's death. Afeni had been in the middle of fighting to maintain control of her son's legacy, facing challenges from record labels, former associates, and people claiming to have rights to unreleased materials. She had needed somewhere safe to store the materials that mattered most, somewhere outside the legal battles, somewhere protected. But her grandmother's husband had died shortly after. The studio had been forgotten, and the materials had remained here, hidden and protected by the very building everyone now dismissed as worthless. Maya sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by boxes containing what might be the most significant collection of unreleased Tupac material in existence, and started to laugh. Not from joy, not yet. From the sheer impossibility of what she had found. Everyone had laughed at her for accepting this inheritance. They had called her foolish, desperate, stupid. They had mocked the building, dismissed it as worthless, predicted her complete failure. And here she sat, in a basement vault, surrounded by materials worth potentially millions of dollars. She didn't know exactly what everything was worth. She didn't know how to authenticate it, how to sell it, how to navigate the complex legal landscape of Tupac's estate. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed forever. The discovery should have felt triumphant. But as Maya sat among the boxes in that sealed basement room, triumph wasn't what she felt. It was terror, overwhelming, paralyzing terror, that she had just uncovered something so valuable she had no idea how to protect it, how to authenticate it, or how to keep from being robbed, exploited, or destroyed by the very thing that was supposed to save her. She carefully closed the boxes she had opened, her mind racing through immediate problems. The building had no security system. The neighborhood was dangerous. Anyone who learned what was down here could break in easily. She had proven that herself. She couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until she understood what she had and how to protect it. That first night, after securing the generator and carefully closing the vault door behind her, she drove home in a daze. Sofia was already asleep at the neighbor's apartment. Maya paid the woman $40 she couldn't afford, carried her daughter to the car, and drove through the quiet streets while her mind spun through possibilities and dangers in equal measure. She spent the weekend researching, barely sleeping, consuming every piece of information she could find about authenticating unreleased music materials, about the legal complexities of Tupac's estate, about the market for rare recordings. The more she learned, the more overwhelming it became. Authenticating unreleased Tupac material wasn't something you could do with a quick Google search. The market was flooded with fakes, bootlegs, and disputed recordings. Tupac's estate was notoriously protective of his legacy, and unauthorized releases had led to lawsuits that bankrupted collectors and dealers. But what she had found wasn't unauthorized. The letter from Afeni Shakur proved that her grandmother's late husband had been entrusted with these materials legally. That should protect her. Should being the critical word. Monday morning, Maya called in sick to both jobs, something she had never done before, and drove to the building with a plan. First, she needed to document everything. Every box, every tape, every document. She spent 8 hours in that basement room, photographing labels, creating inventories on her phone, organizing materials, while trying not to think about how valuable each item might be. The sheer volume of material was staggering. There were master tapes for songs she recognized from posthumous releases, but with alternate takes, different mixes, extended versions that had never been heard publicly. There were collaborations with artists who had never publicly acknowledged working with Tupac, some because the collaborations had been planned but never completed before his death, others because legal issues had prevented the releases from happening. She found videotapes of recording sessions, dozens of hours of footage showing Tupac at work. In some, he was serious and focused, perfecting his delivery. In others, he was joking with producers and other artists, showing a side of himself that fans rarely got to see. These weren't professional documentaries. They were raw footage, behind the scenes, glimpses into the creative process of one of hip-hop's greatest artists. And then there were the truly extraordinary items. A box containing what appeared to be Tupac's personal journals from those final months. The pages were filled with his handwriting, not just lyrics, but thoughts, reflections, plans for the future he wouldn't live to see. Poetry that had never been published, letters he had written but apparently never sent. These were the most intimate materials in the entire collection, windows into his mind during some of the most turbulent months of his life. Another box contained a complete, unreleased album, not fragments, not demo tracks. A finished album with production notes, sequencing decisions, track listings, and even artwork concepts. The album was titled Machiavelli Returns and appeared to be a follow-up to the album released under his Machiavelli persona. Every track was complete, mixed, and ready for release. It was an album the world had never heard, never even knew existed. By the end of the day, she had catalogued over 200 individual items, each one potentially worth thousands of dollars. Some, like the unreleased album, the video footage, the personal journals, could be worth millions if authenticated and handled properly. But how did a single mother, with no connections, no money, and no expertise, navigate this world? The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, exhausted and overwhelmed, Maya made what she would later recognize as a calculated risk. She mentioned her discovery to her sister, Elena. She didn't reveal everything, didn't specify exactly what she had found, just that she had discovered materials related to Tupac Shakur in the building's basement. Materials that might have significant value. Elena's response was immediate and harsh. "You found what? Maya, this is insane. You can't just stumble onto Tupac's lost recordings and expect to sell them like you're having a garage sale. There are legal issues, authentication issues. God, the estate will sue you into oblivion if you try to profit from his work without authorization." "I have authorization," Maya said quietly. "There's a letter from his mother, from Afeni Shakur, dated right after his death. She asked my grandmother's husband to protect the materials." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long Maya thought the call had dropped. Then Elena spoke again, her voice completely different now. Not dismissive, not skeptical, calculating, focused, suddenly, very serious. "A letter from Afeni Shakur. Do you know what that means? Maya, if this is real, if you can authenticate it, you're not just sitting on something valuable. You're sitting on a piece of music history. But you need help. Professional help. Lawyers who specialize in entertainment law. Authenticators who work with major estates. People who know this world, who understand how to protect your interests while respecting the estate's control over Tupac's legacy. I don't have money for lawyers. You don't need money up front. If what you have is real, and it sounds like it might be, lawyers will work on contingency. They'll take a percentage of whatever you eventually receive, but they'll front all the costs. Authentication, storage, security, legal fees, everything. The risk becomes theirs. Let me make some calls. I know someone who knows someone. Give me 24 hours. Maya should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt uneasy. Elena's shift from mockery to eagerness had happened too quickly, too completely. But she was right about one thing: Maya couldn't navigate this alone. The legal complexities, the authentication process, the negotiations with the estate, all of it required expertise she simply didn't have. The lawyer Elena connected her with was named David Chen, an entertainment attorney who specialized in music rights and estate issues. His firm had represented artists in disputes with record labels, had helped families navigate the complexities of posthumous releases, had brokered deals between estates and collectors. He agreed to meet Maya at the building the following day, contingent on her signing a non-disclosure agreement that made her head spin with legal terminology she barely understood. When Chen arrived, he was younger than Maya expected, maybe 40, dressed in casual business attire that still probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. But his demeanor was professional without being condescending, and he listened carefully as Maya explained what she had found. He brought 2 specialists with him, an authenticator who worked with major auction houses and had verified materials for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and a music archivist who had catalogued collections for several famous estates, including those of Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, and multiple hip-hop pioneers. Maya led them to the basement, to the vault she had opened. She had cleaned the area as best she could, improved the lighting with additional battery-powered lamps, organized the boxes in a way that would make examination easier. When the three men saw the materials for the first time, their professional facades cracked completely. The authenticator, a man named Robert, who had seen countless rare materials in his career, actually stopped walking when he saw the shelves full of archival boxes, all carefully labeled, all apparently intact. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "This is real. This is actually real." They spent the next 6 hours examining the materials. The authenticator worked methodically, checking serial numbers on tapes, comparing handwriting samples against known exemplars, analyzing the paper and ink used on documents to verify they matched materials from the mid-1990s. The archivist went through the boxes with reverence bordering on religious awe, his hands trembling as he handled lyric sheets and session notes, as he read through production logs and viewed photographs that documented recording sessions the world had never known about. Chen photographed everything, documenting the discovery with the kind of thoroughness that spoke of massive legal implications. He took pictures of the vault itself, the security door, the condition of the materials, the labeling system, every detail that would help establish provenance and chain of custody. Maya watched them work, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. These weren't just experts impressed by rare materials. These were professionals who had dedicated their careers to music history, and they were looking at her discovery with expressions that mixed excitement, disbelief, and something close to wonder. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade and the basement grew darker despite their portable lights, Chen turned to Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't excitement. Exactly. It was more serious than that. More weighted with responsibility. "Miss Torres, do you understand what you have here?" She shook her head slowly, not trusting her voice. "This is one of the most significant musical discoveries in decades. If everything authenticates and preliminary examination suggests it will, you're looking at materials worth conservatively between $60 and $80 million. Possibly more, if the unreleased album is as complete as it appears, and if the video materials are as extensive as the labels suggest." The number didn't feel real. It was too large, too abstract. $60 to $80 million. She made $18 an hour at her day job. She was 3 months behind on rent. She drove a car held together by hope and prayers. How did those two realities exist in the same universe? "But," Chen continued, and Maya's stomach dropped at that single word, "there are significant legal hurdles ahead. Tupac's estate maintains strict control over his unreleased materials and his public image. Even though you have documentation suggesting these materials were legally entrusted to your grandmother's late husband for safekeeping, the estate will need to verify everything. They may dispute certain aspects of ownership. They will certainly want to control how and when materials are released to the public. So, I found all this, and I don't actually own it?" Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. "You own the physical materials," the authenticator interjected, setting down a box he had been examining. "The tapes, the documents, the photographs, those are yours. But the rights to the recordings, the intellectual property, Tupac's image and likeness, those are controlled by the estate. You can't just sell these at auction or release them independently without their cooperation and approval." Maya felt the hope that had been building for the last 48 hours begin to crumble. Of course it wouldn't be simple. Nothing in her life had ever been simple. Why would this be different? Chen must have seen the despair washing over her face because his expression softened slightly. "Miss Torres, this isn't necessarily bad news. The estate has released posthumous materials before. They've worked with people who discovered unreleased recordings. They're protective of Tupac's legacy, absolutely, but they're not unreasonable. What you need is a formal authentication process, ironclad documentation of the chain of custody, and experienced legal representation in negotiations with the estate. All of which costs money I don't have, which is why I'm proposing we work on contingency. My firm will front all costs, authentication, climate-controlled storage, security, legal fees, everything required to properly document and protect these materials. When we reach an agreement with the estate, when materials are sold or licensed, we take 30% of whatever you receive. The financial risk is entirely ours, but the bulk of the reward will be yours. 30% seemed like a lot until Maya did the math in her head. If the materials were worth even $60 million, 30% meant Chen's firm would take $18 million, but that still left $42 million for her. $42 million. The number was so absurd, she almost laughed out loud. There's one other thing, Chen said, his voice dropping lower, taking on a more serious tone. Until authentication is complete and we have a formal agreement with the estate, this discovery needs to remain completely confidential. If word gets out prematurely, you'll be flooded with offers from people trying to exploit you, with counterfeit claims from people pretending they have rights to the materials, potentially even with theft attempts. This building isn't secure. The neighborhood isn't safe. We need to move these materials immediately to a climate-controlled, high-security facility. He was right, but the thought of the materials leaving the building terrified Maya. What if they disappeared? What if she signed papers that somehow gave away her rights without her fully understanding? What if this was all an elaborate scheme to separate her from the most valuable thing she'd ever possessed? The archivist, an older man who had been quietly documenting materials throughout the conversation, spoke up. His voice was gentle, grandfatherly. "Miss Torres, I understand your hesitation. I really do. But Mr. Chen is absolutely correct about the security risk. I've worked with estates and collectors for 30 years. Materials like these are irreplaceable. If anything happened to them before proper authentication, if there was a fire, a flood, if someone broke in and stole them, you'd lose not just their monetary value but the historical record they represent. And Tupac's legacy, his fans who've been waiting decades to hear his final creative work, they deserve better than that risk." That argument reached Maya in a way the discussion of money hadn't. This wasn't just about her financial salvation, though God knew she needed it desperately. These recordings, these documents, these glimpses into Tupac's creative process and personal thoughts, they belonged to history. They belonged to the culture he had helped shape. They belonged to fans who had mourned him for decades and deserved to hear the work he had created in his final months. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Move them. But I want to be involved in every step. I want to know where they are at all times, who has access to them, what's happening with authentication. I want copies of every report, every document, every communication with the estate." Chen nodded seriously. "Absolutely. Full transparency. You'll have access to everything. This is your discovery, Miss Torres. We're just helping you navigate the legal and commercial complexities." The materials were moved that night. Chen had called ahead, arranged for a specialized transport company that handled valuable art and historical documents. They arrived with climate-controlled vehicles, professional packing materials, security personnel. Maya watched as each box was carefully removed from the vault, inventoried, photographed in place before being packed, then photographed again after packing. The chain of custody was being documented with obsessive precision. The entire process took 4 hours. By the time the last box was loaded and the vehicles pulled away into the Los Angeles night, Maya felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond anything physical labor had ever done to her. She secured the vault door, locked the building, and sat in her car for 20 minutes before she felt steady enough to drive. She didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in bed next to Sofia, listening to her daughter's soft breathing, and ran through scenarios in her mind. What if the authentication failed? What if the materials were somehow fake? Or if there were legal complications she hadn't foreseen? What if the estate refused to work with her, claimed the materials had been stolen rather than entrusted for safekeeping? But the next morning, Chen's office sent her the first preliminary authentication reports. The tapes were using correct materials for the period. The handwriting on lyric sheets matched known Tupac exemplars. The serial numbers on master recordings matched production records from 1996. The photographs showed studio spaces that matched known Death Row Records locations. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. This was real. This was authentic. This was exactly what it appeared to be. Word of the discovery began to leak despite the non-disclosure agreements everyone had signed. Not the specific details, but the fact that something significant related to Tupac had been found. Maya's phone started ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters wanting comments. Music bloggers asking for interviews. People claiming to be associates of Tupac's estate. Though Chen's office confirmed most were frauds, looking to insert themselves into a lucrative situation. She ignored them all, following Chen's advice to direct every inquiry to his office. Her family's reaction, when the rumors reached them, ranged from disbelief to barely concealed jealousy. Elena called, ostensibly to congratulate her, but quickly pivoting to asking whether Maya had considered family in her newfound wealth, reminding her that Elena had made the introduction to Chen, suggesting that perhaps some kind of finder's fee would be appropriate. Miguel, who had mocked her inheritance so viciously just weeks before, suddenly wanted to discuss investment opportunities and partnership ventures. He had business ideas, he said, ways Maya could really make that money work once the estate deal went through. The fact that he had called her stupid for accepting the building seemed to have been completely forgotten. Even distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years began emerging. A second cousin, she didn't even know existed, sent a Facebook message explaining that he had always admired her courage and asking if she might be interested in helping fund his startup. An aunt she hadn't seen since childhood called to reminisce about family bonds and mention that she was behind on her mortgage. The mockery had turned to predation. Everyone who had laughed at her, everyone who had called the building worthless, everyone who had predicted her failure, they all suddenly saw her differently. Not as Maya, the struggling single mother who could barely pay rent. As Maya, the potential millionaire who might be willing to share. The only person who seemed genuinely happy for her without expectation was Sofia. Her daughter, still too young to fully understand what had happened, only knew that her mother smiled more, that the lines of worry around her eyes had begun to smooth, that maybe, finally, things would be okay. "Mama, are we rich now?" Sofia asked, one evening, as they ate dinner together at their tiny kitchen table. Maya pulled her close, breathing in the smell of her daughter's shampoo. "Not yet, baby, but maybe soon, maybe very soon." The authentication process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks, during which Maya existed in a strange limbo between her old life of crushing poverty and a future she could barely imagine. She still went to work at the medical billing office, though it felt increasingly surreal to sit under fluorescent lights, processing insurance claims, when she potentially had millions of dollars worth of Tupac materials being authenticated. She still cleaned offices at night, though her mind wandered constantly to what might be happening with the estate negotiations. She still drove the dying Honda Civic, still counted pennies at the grocery store, still performed the same desperate calculations about which bills to pay and which to let slide another month. Nothing had actually changed yet. She had no money, no security, no certainty that any of this would actually work out. But the possibility of change hung over everything like a promise or a threat, depending on the moment. During those 6 weeks, Other pressures mounted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Rafael, Sofia's father, somehow learned about the discovery Maya never found out how, and filed an emergency motion for increased custody, claiming that Maya's sudden potential wealth indicated she had been hiding assets, and that her financial instability made her an unfit parent. The motion was transparently ridiculous and quickly dismissed by the family court judge, but it cost Maya sleepless nights and emergency legal fees she couldn't afford. Her landlord, hearing rumors of the discovery through the neighborhood gossip network, suddenly demanded immediate payment of all back rent plus late penalties, threatening eviction despite having given her extensions for months. When Maya explained that the money wasn't hers yet, that authentication was still ongoing and no deal had been signed, he accused her of hiding assets and reported her to social services for suspected fraud. The social services investigation was brief, but deeply humiliating. A caseworker visited her apartment, documented the cramped conditions, the threadbare furniture, the general poverty that had been Maya's reality for years. She questioned Sofia about their living situation, about whether Maya was providing adequate care, about whether Sofia felt safe and secure. The woman was professional but thorough, and Maya felt the old shame returning, the shame of poverty, of being judged for circumstances beyond her control, of having to justify her existence and her parenting to strangers with clipboards. The investigation concluded quickly with a finding of no concerns, but the experience left Maya shaken. Even the possibility of wealth brought new vulnerabilities, new ways for people to attack her, new threats to the fragile stability she had built for herself and Sofia. At work, the atmosphere changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Her co-workers, who had once been friendly in that casual, surface way, now watched her differently, some with envy, others with suspicion. Karen, who had been openly skeptical about the inheritance, now made pointed comments about people who get lucky while others work hard for everything they have, and lottery winners who forget where they came from. Maya stopped eating lunch in the break room. She arrived exactly on time and left exactly on time, avoiding conversations that might reveal how much the waiting was costing her emotionally. The discovery that should have brought relief had instead brought a different kind of pressure, the weight of potential, the terror of disappointment, the knowledge that everyone was watching and waiting for her to either succeed spectacularly or fail publicly. Chen's office provided regular updates. The authentication was proceeding well. Every test confirmed the materials were genuine. The estate had been formally contacted and was reviewing the chain of custody documentation. Initial legal opinions suggested Maya's claim was solid, supported by the letter from Afeni Shakur and the clear evidence that the materials had been entrusted for safekeeping rather than acquired through any questionable means. But there were complications. Some of the collaborations documented in the materials involved artists who had their own legal teams and their own questions about rights and royalties. Some of the recordings had been partially used in other posthumous releases, raising questions about which elements were truly unreleased. The estate wanted complete documentation of every item, wanted to verify that nothing had been tampered with or altered during the years the materials sat hidden in the vault. Each complication extended the timeline. Each new question required additional documentation. Maya felt like she was drowning in legal complexity, in authentication reports written in language she barely understood, in negotiations happening at a level so far above her experience that she could only trust Chen and his team to protect her interests. The final authentication report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to her personally by Chen himself, who insisted on meeting her in person to discuss the results. They met at a coffee shop halfway between her apartment and his office, a neutral space where Maya felt less overwhelmed than she would have in Chen's expensive conference room. Chen slid a thick folder across the table. "Miss Torres, Everything has authenticated. Every single item. The tapes, the documents, the photographs, the video materials, the personal journals. All of it. The estate has reviewed our documentation and agreed to meet with us. They're prepared to discuss acquisition of the materials for official release. Maya's hands shook as she opened the folder, looking at page after page of technical authentication data that she couldn't fully understand, but which Chen assured her was conclusive. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Acquisition? It means they want to buy the rights from you. Or, more accurately, they want to license the rights to release the album and other materials, with you retaining ownership of certain physical items and receiving ongoing royalties based on commercial performance." "How much?" Chen paused, and in that pause, Maya heard her entire future shifting, felt the ground beneath her life tilting towards something she couldn't yet comprehend. "They're offering $65 million, $40 million up front for exclusive rights to the unreleased album and associated master recordings, $25 million in guaranteed minimum royalties over the next 10 years, regardless of how the album performs commercially. Plus, you retain full ownership of the physical artifacts, the lyric sheets, personal journals, photographs, and certain memorabilia items which independent appraisers value at an additional 20 to 30 million for future museum acquisitions and private collectors." Maya sat down hard in her chair, though she was already sitting. Her vision swam. The number was too large to process. She had prepared herself for maybe 20 million, maybe 30 if everything went perfectly. But 65 million, plus another potential 30 from the physical items, that's... She couldn't finish the sentence. The math was beyond her in that moment. "Over $90 million, conservatively," Chen said quietly. "Possibly more if the album becomes a major commercial success and royalties exceed the guaranteed minimum. Miss Torres, you need to understand this is one of the largest music discovery payouts in history. The estate is being extraordinarily generous because they recognize both the legal validity of your claim and the extraordinary cultural significance of the materials." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The coffee shop around her felt unreal, like a stage set for a scene from someone else's life. $90 million. After Chen's 30% contingency fee and estimated taxes, she would still have over $40 million. $40 million. She could pay off her rent, buy a house, buy 10 houses. She could ensure Sofia attended the best schools, had the best opportunities, never worried about money the way Maya had worried every single day of her adult life. She could help Elena, despite everything. Help Miguel. Help the family members who had mocked her. She could afford to be generous because the amount was so vast that even giving away millions would barely make a dent. But more than that, she could breathe. For the first time in her adult life, she could simply breathe without the crushing weight of financial terror pressing down on her chest. "The estate wants to meet with you personally," Chen continued, his voice pulling her back to the present. "They want to hear the story of how you found everything. They want to understand your connection to your grandmother's late husband. To verify the chain of custody, in your own words. They want to ensure the materials will be handled with proper respect for Tupac's legacy. Can you come to our office tomorrow? I'll be there. My full team will be there, but they want to meet you face to face." "Yes," Maya whispered. "Yes, I'll be there." The meeting with Tupac's estate representatives was smaller and more personal than Maya had expected. She had imagined a huge conference room filled with lawyers and executives, people in expensive suits asking aggressive questions, treating her like someone to be managed or contained. Instead, there were 5 people waiting when she arrived. The estate's lead representative, 2 lawyers, an archivist, and a representative from the record label that would handle the album's release. The lead representative was a woman in her 50s named Janice, who had worked directly with Afeni Shakur before her death and now managed Tupac's legacy on behalf of the family trust. She stood when Maya entered, came around the conference table, and shook Maya's hand warmly. "Miss Torres, thank you for meeting with us. Before we discuss business, before we talk about contracts or money or any of that, we want to thank you. What you found, what you protected, even unknowingly, it matters." Afeni spent years trying to locate materials she knew existed but couldn't find. She would have been grateful to you. Maya's eyes stung with sudden tears. She hadn't expected emotion, hadn't prepared for the weight of that statement, for the idea that she had completed something Tupac's own mother had been trying to accomplish. "Tell us how you found them," Janice continued gently, gesturing for Maya to sit. "We've read the reports, seen the documentation, but we want to hear it from you. The full story." So Maya told it, everything. The inheritance she couldn't afford to accept, the mockery from family and friends who said she was making another stupid decision, the condemned building everyone dismissed as worthless, the nights working by lantern light, exhausted from her 2 jobs, trying to open a vault nobody else cared about. The moment she had pulled open that door and seen the boxes, seen Tupac's name appearing again and again on labels and documents, realizing that the building had saved her life. Her voice cracked when she described sitting on that basement floor, surrounded by materials worth millions, laughing from the sheer impossibility of it all. Janice reached across the table and squeezed her hand. When Maya finished, silence filled the conference room. Then Janice spoke again, her own voice, thick with emotion. "Your grandmother's late husband did exactly what Afeni asked him to do. He protected these materials during the most chaotic period after Tupac's death. When the lawsuits were flying, when everyone was trying to profit from his work without caring about his artistic vision, when his mother was fighting every day to preserve his legacy properly, he kept these safe. And when he died, and the studio closed, and the building was abandoned, the materials remained protected, locked away, waiting for someone who would recognize their value and understand their importance." The contracts were presented, page after page of legal language that Chen walked Maya through carefully, explaining each clause, each term, each protection built in for both parties. The $65 million offer was structured in ways designed to protect everyone: Maya, the estate, Tupac's legacy. Payments would be made in stages, with the majority up front, but portions held in trust to ensure ongoing cooperation and prevent future legal disputes. There were terms about how the materials would be released, about Maya's approval rights for certain uses, about her role in documentary materials that might be created about the discovery. The estate was protective, yes, but they were also fair. They understood that Maya had saved these materials, that without her, the world might never have known they existed. Maya signed. Her hand shook so badly, the signature barely looked like her name, but it was legal, binding, real. "There's one more thing," Janice said after the papers were completed and witnessed. "The estate would like to publicly credit you when we announce the album, not just as the person who found it, but as a guardian of Tupac's legacy. We want the world to know that this music survived because someone cared enough to look past the decay and see what was hidden underneath." Maya started to say that wasn't necessary, that she didn't want the attention. But Janice continued, "Stories matter, Miss Torres. The story of a single mother who inherited a worthless building and found a treasure that's a story worth telling, not because it's dramatic, though it is, but because it's true, because it shows that valuable things are often hidden in places we're taught to dismiss. That persistence and faith sometimes reveal what cynicism overlooks. That hope, even when everyone calls it foolish, is sometimes exactly right." The first payment arrived in Maya's bank account 3 days later. $40 million appeared in the account that had never held more than a few $100s at once. She stared at her phone for a full hour, refreshing the banking app over and over, convinced there must be a mistake, that the number would disappear or reveal itself as a cruel error. But it didn't disappear. $40 million. Real. Hers. She paid her rent immediately. All the back rent, all the penalties, the current month, the next 6 months in advance. Her landlord, who had threatened her with eviction and accused her of fraud just weeks earlier, suddenly became obsequious, calling to apologize for any misunderstandings, offering to upgrade her apartment, to fix things that had been broken for years. Maya declined politely. She wouldn't be staying. She bought a house. Not a mansion, not something ostentatious that would draw attention or change who she was at her core. A real house with 4 bedrooms and a yard where Sofia could play. In a neighborhood with excellent schools and safe streets, and other children for Sofia to become friends with. A house with a real kitchen where Maya could cook without feeling cramped. A house with an office where she could think about what she wanted to do with the rest of her life, now that survival was no longer her only focus. She bought a new car, still practical, still modest by the standards of $40 million wealth, but reliable, safe, a car that started every single time she turned the key, that didn't fill her with anxiety every time she drove, that had working brakes and a transmission that didn't grind ominously on hills. The first time she drove it, Maya cried at a red light, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of reliability. And then she did something that surprised everyone who knew her. She walked into the medical billing office where she had worked for years and gave proper 2 weeks' notice. Not because she had to, she could have quit immediately, could have walked out and never thought about the place again, but because her co-workers deserved the courtesy, deserved time to adjust to her absence and redistribute her workload. It was the right thing to do. On her last day, she left sealed envelopes for each person she had worked with. Inside each envelope was $5,000 in cash. Not huge amounts that would make people uncomfortable or feel like charity, but enough to make a real difference. Enough to pay off credit cards, to fix a car, to take a vacation, to handle an emergency without panic. Karen, who had been so skeptical about the inheritance, who had made those pointed comments about lucky people forgetting where they came from, cried when she opened her envelope. I never thought, Maya. I'm so sorry for how I treated you, for the things I said. Maya hugged her, and the hug was genuine, without resentment. You saw what everyone else saw. A woman making what looked like a foolish decision. You weren't wrong to be skeptical. You just didn't see the whole story yet. She gave similar gifts to others who had been part of her life during the hardest years. The neighbor who had watched Sofia so many times, who had charged $10 an hour but had never demanded payment. When Maya couldn't afford it, she received $20,000 and a note thanking her for keeping Sofia safe. The hardware store clerk who had helped her buy supplies for opening the vault, who had encouraged her when the task seemed impossible. He received a check and Maya's genuine gratitude. She didn't make a show of the giving, didn't announce it publicly or use it for self-promotion. She simply, quietly, helped the people who had been there during the desperate years, who had shown kindness when they didn't have to, who had treated her with dignity even when she had nothing. The public announcement of the discovery came 6 months after Maya had signed the contracts. The estate held a major press conference in Los Angeles, revealing the unreleased album and explaining how it had been found. Major media attended, music journalists, entertainment reporters, hip-hop historians, people who understood the magnitude of what was being shared with the world. Maya attended with Sofia beside her. Her daughter, now 8 years old, wore a new dress and sat very properly in the front row, watching as executives and historians talked about the significance of the materials her mother had found. Sofia didn't fully understand everything being said, but she understood that her mother had done something important, something that people respected. The album was released 3 months later, with elaborate packaging that included reproductions of some of the lyric sheets Maya had found, photographs from the recording sessions, and liner notes that told the story of the material's preservation and discovery. The first week's sales broke records for posthumous releases. It debuted at #1 on every chart that mattered, went platinum within days, and sparked a cultural conversation about Tupac's legacy that dominated music coverage for months. Critics called it some of his finest work, a missing piece that illuminated his artistic evolution during those final months in ways previously unknown. The production was praised as innovative, yet true to his vision. The lyrics were analyzed in academic papers and think pieces, examined for their insights into his mindset, his plans for the future, his artistic development. Fans embraced the album with an intensity that reminded everyone why Tupac's influence endured decades after his death. Listening parties were held across the country. Fans posted emotional reactions online, many crying as they heard their hero's voice in new recordings they had never imagined existed. The album became a phenomenon, not just musically but culturally, a reminder of how one artist's work could still resonate across generations. And Maya's role in the discovery became part of the story, not the center of the story that belonged to Tupac and his music, but an important thread, the struggling single mother who had inherited a condemned building and refused to give up, who had worked by lantern light to open a vault nobody else cared about, who had protected materials worth millions even when she had nothing, because she understood they were important beyond their monetary value. Maya gave only one major interview to a respected music journalist who had covered Tupac's career from the beginning and who approached his legacy with genuine reverence rather than sensationalism. "Everyone told me the building was worthless," Maya said during that interview, sitting in the restored studio where the discovery had been made. Family, friends, co-workers, everyone. They said I was foolish for accepting an abandoned building when I could barely pay rent, that I should cut my losses and walk away, that I was making another stupid decision in a life full of stupid decisions. She paused, looking around the studio that now gleamed with new equipment, with fresh paint, with the care and attention it deserved. But I couldn't walk away, not because I was brave or visionary, because I was desperate and stubborn and too broke to afford what everyone else called good judgment. Because some part of me needed to prove that I could make one decision that worked out, that I wasn't just the poor single mother everyone pitied or mocked. "And what would you say to people facing similar situations?" the journalist asked. "People being told to give up on something they believe in." Maya smiled, and the smile reached her eyes in a way it never had during the desperate years. "I'd say that sometimes the things the world dismisses as worthless are exactly the things worth fighting for. The building saved my life, yes, but I also saved it. We saved each other. And maybe that's the real lesson. That value isn't always obvious. That treasure can be hidden in the last place anyone thinks to look. That hope, even when everyone calls it foolish, is sometimes the most practical thing you can hold on to." The building itself, the condemned structure everyone had mocked, Maya kept. She could have sold it, could have profited from the notoriety, could have turned it into something commercial that traded on its history. Instead, she spent $2 million restoring it properly, bringing it back, not to what it had been, but to what it could be. The restoration took 18 months. Every detail was considered carefully. The original architecture was preserved, where possible, the high ceilings, the thick walls, the bones of the building that had been solid all along. But everything else was updated with modern equipment, with technology that would serve the next generation of artists. When the building finally reopened, it wasn't as a private studio, it was as a community resource. Young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds could apply for free studio time. Established artists could rent space at rates that supported the facility's maintenance, but were far below market value. Educational programs were established, teaching kids from the neighborhood about music production, about the business side of the industry, about how to protect their creative work. The vault in the basement was preserved exactly as Maya had found it, converted into a small museum exhibit. Visitors could see where the materials had been stored, could understand the story of their preservation and discovery. It wasn't commercialized or sensationalized. It was treated with respect, as a reminder that important things are sometimes hidden, that persistence can reveal treasures, that hope matters. The neighborhood around the building began to change, but not through gentrification, through community investment. The studio brought jobs, brought positive attention, brought a sense of pride to an area that had been dismissed as worthless for too long, just like the building itself had been dismissed. Local businesses stabilized, property values increased, but in ways that benefited existing residents rather than displacing them. The community, seeing investment in its potential rather than exploitation of its struggles, responded by investing in itself. Maya didn't run the facility herself. She hired music industry professionals who understood the culture, who could nurture talent, who could navigate the business complexities better than she ever could. But she visited often, walking through the restored spaces, watching young artists record in rooms where Tupac had once worked, seeing teenagers learn about music production in the same building that had saved her life. Sofia, now 11 years old, sometimes came with her. Maya's daughter had grown up understanding her mother's story, understanding that wealth didn't erase struggle, that success didn't mean forgetting where you came from, that privilege created responsibility. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd refused the inheritance?" Sofia asked one afternoon, standing in the main studio watching a group of teenagers record their first demo. Maya considered the question, one she had asked herself many times over the years. "Every day, I think about how close I came to walking away, how everyone told me to walk away, how it would have been easier to listen to them, to make the practical decision, to cut my losses and accept that I was just someone who bad things happened to. What made you keep going?" "Honestly, I'm still not entirely sure. Maybe I was too stubborn to let everyone be right about me. Maybe I needed to prove I could make one good decision. Maybe I just couldn't let go of that last connection to your great-grandmother." She paused, watching the young artists work, listening to them create something new. Or maybe some part of me knew that the things everyone else dismisses are sometimes exactly the things worth fighting for. That hope, even when it looks foolish, is sometimes the most valuable thing we have. 5 years after the discovery, Maya Torres was worth just over $200 million. The initial settlement had been invested conservatively but wisely, generating steady returns. The ongoing royalties from the album exceeded even the optimistic projections, adding millions annually. The physical artifacts she had retained, the lyric sheets, the personal journals, some of the photographs had been sold to museums and serious collectors for amounts that kept surprising her. But she lived modestly by billionaire standards. The house was comfortable, but not palatial. The car was nice, but not exotic. Her daily life focused not on accumulation but on purpose, on using her resources to create opportunities for others, on ensuring that her windfall benefited more people than just herself and Sofia. She established a foundation with an initial endowment of $20 million, focused on music education and preservation of hip-hop history. The foundation funded programs in schools, supported archival efforts to preserve materials from hip-hop's pioneers before they were lost, and provided scholarships for students pursuing music careers. She gave generously but thoughtfully to organizations supporting single mothers, because she remembered those desperate years, to programs fighting childhood poverty, because she knew how hunger felt, to community development projects in neglected neighborhoods, because she understood how it felt to live in a place the world had dismissed as worthless. But she also continued helping individuals in direct, personal ways, She paid off medical debts for strangers she read about online. She funded college educations for kids who reminded her of Sofia, kids with potential but no resources. She supported small businesses in struggling areas, providing capital that banks wouldn't, giving people chances that nobody had given her before. Tupac's vault changed everything. Her family relationships remained complicated, which Maya had made peace with. Elena had apologized for her initial reaction and for getting too caught up in the money, and they had slowly rebuilt their relationship into something stronger than before. They weren't as close as they once were, but they were honest now, and honesty mattered more than proximity. Miguel kept his distance, his pride apparently preventing him from accepting help from the cousin he had mocked so viciously. Maya sent him a card each year on his birthday, with a simple note offering support if he ever needed it. He never responded, but she sent the cards anyway. Other relatives cycled through various levels of engagement, their motivations often transparent, but their needs sometimes genuine. Maya helped when she could, when requests came from real need rather than entitlement. She had learned to say no without guilt, to recognize the difference between supporting family and enabling dysfunction, to understand that generosity didn't require martyrdom. Rafael, Sofia's father, had tried once to sue for a portion of Maya's wealth, claiming his abandonment of their daughter somehow entitled him to compensation for lost child support opportunities. The lawsuit was laughed out of court, literally. The judge had chuckled while dismissing it, and Rafael disappeared again. Maya hoped he found peace, but she didn't need him to find it in her life or Sofia's. The unreleased Tupac album went on to win multiple Grammy Awards in posthumous categories, was inducted into the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry for its cultural and historical significance, and generated ongoing scholarly analysis. Every check that arrived from royalties felt surreal payment for having the persistence to open a door, for believing something could be valuable when everyone else said it was worthless. On the 10th anniversary of the discovery, the foundation Maya had established hosted a major symposium on hip-hop preservation at the restored studio. Scholars, artists, archivists, and industry professionals gathered to discuss how to protect the genre's history, how to ensure that the materials documenting hip-hop's evolution weren't lost to time, neglect, or commercial exploitation. Maya gave the opening remarks, standing in the same studio where Tupac had recorded, looking out at an audience that included some of the most influential figures in music and cultural preservation. 10 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I inherited a building everyone said was worthless. I was told to walk away, to cut my losses, to accept that some things aren't worth saving. I was told this by family who loved me, by friends who cared about me, by practical people who were trying to protect me from making another mistake. She paused, letting the words settle. But I couldn't do it. Not because I was brave or visionary or special, because I was desperate and stubborn and too broke to afford what everyone else called good judgment. Because I needed to believe that one thing in my life could work out, that one decision could be right, that one gamble could pay off. What I found in this building's basement changed my life in obvious ways. I went from being 3 months behind on rent to having more money than I'd ever need. I went from driving a dying car and worrying about eviction to being able to give my daughter security and opportunity. The financial transformation was real and profound, and I'm grateful for it every single day. But what I found here taught me something more important than wealth. It taught me about value, how we decide what matters and what doesn't, about how easy it is to dismiss things as worthless when we don't look closely enough to see what they really are, about how the world teaches us to give up on the difficult things, the decaying things, the things that require faith and persistence, and stubborn refusal to accept everyone else's judgment. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. Tupac's music was hidden in a vault, in a condemned building, in a neighborhood most people avoided. It survived because decades ago, someone recognized its value and protected it. But it was nearly lost forever, because everyone after that person assumed the building was worthless. They saw graffiti and broken windows and decay, and they stopped looking. They accepted the surface reality and never thought to dig deeper. How many other treasures are hidden in places we've been taught to dismiss? How many stories, how much history, how much culture exists in buildings we're ready to demolish, in neighborhoods we're ready to abandon, in communities we've decided aren't worth investing in? How much potential are we overlooking because we've accepted judgments about worthlessness that might not be true? The symposium ran for 3 days, producing concrete initiatives to preserve hip-hop history, to archive materials before they disappeared, to recognize that cultural treasures don't always reside in prestigious institutions. Maya funded many of these initiatives, but she also empowered others to lead them, understanding that her role was to facilitate rather than control, to enable rather than dominate. Sofia, now 17 and preparing for college, had decided to study music, business, and archival science. She wanted to continue her mother's work, wanted to ensure that future generations' music and culture would be preserved and valued. She had scholarship offers from multiple prestigious universities, could have gone anywhere, but she chose to stay in Los Angeles, to remain connected to the community where her mother's transformation had happened. Maya supported the decision completely, proud that her daughter had learned the lesson. The building had taught that what the world dismisses as worthless might be exactly what's most worth saving, that value often hides in unexpected places, that hope and persistence can reveal treasures everyone else has overlooked. The building itself had become a landmark in the years since the discovery. Music pilgrims visited to see where Tupac had recorded during those final months, where his final creative work had been hidden and then revealed. Students came to learn and create. The community embraced it as their own, proof that investment in potential, rather than exploitation of struggle, could transform entire neighborhoods. Maya still visited regularly, walking through the spaces she had once explored by lantern light with a dying phone battery, remembering the terror and the desperate hope that had driven her to keep searching when everyone told her to stop. The vault in the basement remained empty now, but perfectly preserved, a reminder of what had been hidden and what had been revealed, of what had almost been lost and what had ultimately been saved. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the building was quiet and the young artists had gone home, Maya would stand in that vault alone and remember the fear of those nights working in darkness, the desperation of wondering if she was wasting her time on a fantasy, the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, the worthless inheritance would somehow save her. She had been right, though not in any way she could have predicted or even imagined. The building had saved her, not because of what was hidden in its basement, though that mattered, but because accepting it had required her to believe she deserved something more than poverty and mockery and failure, because opening that vault had required persistence when everyone told her to quit, because protecting what she found had required her to value something beyond her immediate desperation, to see significance that transcended dollars and cents. The money had changed her life materially, but the building had changed her fundamentally. And sometimes, in those quiet moments alone in the vault where she had found salvation, Maya would whisper a thank you to her grandmother, who had held onto the property despite everyone advising her to sell, who had preserved this possibility even without knowing what she was preserving, to her grandmother's late husband, who had protected Tupac's materials when chaos reigned, who had kept his promise to Afeni Shaka even though nobody would ever know, to Afeni herself, who had trusted that the materials would be safe until the right person found them, who had believed that value would eventually be recognized and honored. And to the building itself, the condemned structure everyone had dismissed, the worthless inheritance everyone had mocked, the burden that had become a blessing, the decay that had hidden treasure, the ending that had been a beginning all along. It had been worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth everything, just like she had been. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.